The 2000s started with Shaq, Kobe, and the Lakers winning 3 titles in a row.
Back to back to back.
And ended, well, with Kobe and the Lakers winning yet another ring. But the decade was about a lot more than the Lakers' domination. The 2000s featured tons of great scorers and shooters. Let's take a look at the decade's leading scorers, best shooters, and least efficient shooters in each zone around the court. It makes sense to start in the paint. After all, it's the most important spot in the game, and nobody scored more points near the rim in the 2000s than Shaq. Simply put, Shaq was one of the most physically imposing players in NBA history, and he used his might and his skills to rack up over 5,400 buckets in this area during the decade. That's more than 10,000 points.
Slam dunk Shaquille O'Neal. No way they're going to stop that.
But as prolific as Shaq was, he wasn't quite as efficient as LeBron James, who entered the league in 2003 and started attacking the bucket right away. James converted 65% of his shots near the hoop in the decade. Nobody in the league had a higher conversion rate.
Posey will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
On the flip side, Chauncey Billups was the least efficient volume scorer near the basket. Billups made some huge shots in the 2000s, but struggled to convert near the rim, making only 48.7% of thousands of attempts in this zone. Let's swing over to the left block. Nobody scored more buckets in this zone than Kevin Garnett, who combined speed, strength, and finesse as well as any big man in the era. Garnett's soft touch from the mid-range was one of his calling cards, and he racked up over 1,100 buckets from this zone in the 2000s. But KG wasn't as efficient here as Allen Houston. Houston had a legendary mid-range game that helped him make 2 All-Star teams as a member of the Knicks. The Knicks! And he converted 49% of hundreds of attempts over here, best among all volume scorers. While Houston's mid-range jumpers were reliable and steady, Antoine Walker's were not. Walker sank an abysmal 30% from here, which would be a bad number from 3-point range. The league as a whole makes about 40% from this area, but Walker stank it up from this zone.
Walker has really been struggling with his shot of late.
Kevin Garnett was one of the best shooting big men of the decade, but there's no doubt who was the best one. Dirk Nowitzki. And folks, settle in for some Dirk appreciation. Nowitzki led all scorers in 3 of our 4 mid-range zones, including this one.
Caught by Dirk. Over by Mute for the win. He gets the bounce. He got the bounce.
Oh, wow.
It takes a lot of gusto for guards to pull up and make mid-range jumpers, but man, Sam Cassell sure had a lot of gusto, folks. And he made nearly half of his shots from this left elbow area, making him the most efficient volume shooter of the decade in this zone. Who was the worst? Andre Iguodala, who will go down in history for helping the Warriors win titles years later, but his mid-range jump shot was never that great. Iggy made just 31% of hundreds of tries from this area in the 2000s.
Step back by Iguodala. Another miss.
As we swing to the right side of the mid-range, we see more Dirk. Nowitzki led all scorers with over 1,100 made buckets in this area. His high release and his pinpoint accuracy fueled the Mavs to the 2006 finals and to the 2011 NBA championship. But as good as Dirk was from this right elbow, he wasn't as accurate as Mo Williams, who sank 48.4% from this zone. Williams was arguably LeBron's best teammate during his first stint in Cleveland because he could create his own shots and knock them down efficiently.
Mo again.
Oh, my. Are you really doing this, Mo Williams? I don't believe it.
Speaking of efficiency, Josh Smith was never that. The talented lefty made just 31.8% of hundreds and hundreds of jumpers from this area.
So Smith, rainbow won't go.
Okay, There are very few signature moves as iconic and as efficient as Dirk's one-legged fadeaway. This area was Dirk's happy place during the 2000s, and he blew away all other scorers in this zone thanks to his signature shot. The dude made over 2,300 buckets from here because, well, he was arguably the most gifted shooter of the decade and because he could shoot his fadeaway anytime he wanted to. Glenn Robinson, known as Big Dog, was a terrific scorer. Big Dog loved the mid-range for his whole career, and he was both active and efficient everywhere. But in terms of efficiency, he outpaced everyone in this zone during the 2000s.
Nice pull-up from Glenn Robinson. What footwork.
On the flip side, Antonio Davis had a fine NBA career, but unlike Dirk or Big Dog, he was never known for his jumper, and Davis made just 31.7% of his shots over here. Not great.
That is the limit of the range of Antonio Davis.
Let's move out past the three-point line, where we find Bruce Bowen. The Spurs were the hipsters of the NBA. They were shooting tons of corner threes before it was cool, and nobody blazed that trail more than Bowen, who sank more left corner threes than anyone else in the decade. But while Bowen was prolific, Kyle Korver was more efficient. Korver made 47.9% of his left corner threes during the decade. Korver benefited from playing alongside Allen Iverson, who broke down defenses and set up Korver hundreds of times from downtown. But Korver didn't stop making corner threes after he left Philly. He was the most efficient shooter from this zone in both of the first 2 decades of this century. Devin George was no Kyle Korver. The guy made only 31.7% from here, way below the league average. Before Steph Curry, there was Ray Allen, the sharpshooter who held the record for most threes in a season before Curry came along and shattered it. While Allen will always be remembered for that corner three in the 2013 finals, he was a monster during the previous decade, especially along the wings.
Ray Allen for the game! Got it!
You could easily argue that Allen was the best overall shooter of the 2000s. But another guy who you'd have to mention, Steve Nash. The 2-time MVP was one of the most accurate three-point shooters in the world during his career. He made 45% of his shots from this zone. More on him in a second. Who was the least efficient here? Another legendary point guard, Gary Payton. He was a lot of things, but efficient from this zone was not one of them. Payton sank just 30.4% of hundreds and hundreds of shots from this area.
Gary off the mark.
It seems like every team in the NBA has a stretch five these days, but Rasheed Wallace was hitting threes from the power forward and center positions well before some of today's big men were even born. Sheed led all NBA scorers from the top of the arc in the 2000s. Stats don't lie.
It's unfair that a guy 6'11", 235 pounds can have that stroke 25 feet.
As good as Sheed was from up here, once again we see Steve Nash as the most efficient. Nash drained 43% of his shots from this key zone. That's really good.
Nash straightaway three. Oh my, cold-blooded.
What Nash was to efficiency, Antoine Walker was to inefficiency. Walker was once asked why he shot so many threes. His legendary answer? Because there are no fours. Now that's a great line, but hitting just 31.4% of your shots from this zone, not so great. Let's move to the right wing. Ray Allen was the leading scorer over here too, and he lit it up in Milwaukee, Seattle, and Boston. He got game all right.
And there's Ray, he's open for the tie! Yes!
The most efficient scorer from this zone? Raja Bell. Most people will remember Bell for famously clotheslining Kobe Bryant. But he was also an accurate shooter from deep. Bell sank 44% of his shots from this area, giving those 7 seconds or less Suns another dangerous weapon on the perimeter. And the least efficient? Darrell Armstrong, who sank just 31.3% of his shots from this zone during the decade. Oof. If you like symmetry, then you'll be thrilled to know that Bruce Bowen led the league in right corner threes too during this era. Bowen was the prototype for today's 3-and-D guys, and he helped the Spurs win multiple rings during the decade.
Bowen for three, yes! Bruce Bowen from deep in the corner.
Even more efficient than Bowen was Jason Capono, who could flat out shoot. Capono made just a hair under half of his right corner threes during the decade. Wow.
Capono for three.
The least efficient shooter from this zone was Shandon Anderson. Now, Anderson was a phenomenal athlete and a dunker. Look at this. But unfortunately, he made fewer than 32% of his right corner threes. Well, there you have it, folks. When the 2000s began, the NBA was transitioning out of the Jordan era and looking for a new set of stars to move the league forward. The shooters on this list not only filled that void, but set the stage for the Splash Brothers and others to help the league evolve yet again.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.